The ground was littered with brass, each casing catching the sun like fragments of fire scattered across the dirt. She bent low, her fingers brushing over the hot shells, dropping them into the canvas bags slung at her side. The work was monotonous, but necessary. Every round accounted for, every trace of the fight gathered up before they moved on. It was almost peaceful in its own strange way. The chaos reduced to the quiet clink of metal meeting cloth. Sweat ran down her neck, soaking into her collar, but she didn't mind. The silence felt earned after the storm of gunfire that had ripped through the air hours before. She had always preferred this part of the aftermath. There was something grounding about it, something that reminded her the world kept turning, even after men tried their best to tear it apart. The dirt smelled of cordite and dust, the taste of gunpowder still clinging faintly to her tongue. Above, the sky was brutally blue, the kind of endless stretch that made you feel small. She crouched and reached again, picking up 2 casings at once, rubbing the grit from their rims before tossing them into the sack. Her boots left shallow prints as she moved down the firing line. She paused once, straightening her back, feeling the dull ache in her shoulders. All around her, the battlefield lay quiet, the echoes of violence already fading into memory. No shouting, no orders barked over the din, no recoil thudding against her shoulder. Just the metallic chatter of her collection. She thought about how strange it was that these little fragments, discarded so easily in the heat of the fight, were the only evidence left behind of something so loud, so final. She knelt again, brushing her fingers over the sand, half burying her hand as she searched for shells that had sunk below the surface. Her breath came slow and steady, her mind elsewhere, wrapped in the rhythm of the task. The weight of the bag grew heavier, but she welcomed it. It gave her something to hold, something real, something to anchor her in the aftermath of chaos. She didn't notice the eyes watching her from the ruins beyond the field. Not yet. For now, there was only her and the casings, and the silence they left behind. From the shadows of a collapsed wall, a figure stirred. She didn't see him at first, too focused on the glint of brass in the dust. The air was thick with heat, wavering like a mirage, and he seemed to step out of it as though he had been conjured from the desert itself. Tall, lean, his rifle slung casually across his chest, the sniper carried himself with the kind of ease that only came from years of surviving places like this. His boots crunched softly against the gravel, and that sound, more than his presence, finally drew her eyes up. She froze for half a heartbeat, her hand still hovering over a casing half, buried in the dirt, his gaze fixed on her, not hostile, not friendly either, just appraising, as if weighing something unseen. A crooked grin slid onto his face, the kind that came from a man who already knew the answer to the question he was about to ask. "You're careful," he said, his voice rough with dust. "Every casing, every piece of brass. Not many bother with that. Most just leave them to rust." She shrugged, brushing dirt from her fingers before dropping the shell into her bag. "Someone has to pick up after you lot." The grin deepened, and he stepped closer, rifle shifting slightly against his shoulder. His shadow stretched long in the sun, falling across the casings between them. "Tell me something," he said, lowering his voice. "You ever actually fired one of these, or do you just clean up the mess?" Her jaw tightened, though she didn't rise to the bait. She reached for another casing instead, holding it up between her fingers. "Doesn't matter who pulls the trigger. This ends up here either way." For a moment he was silent, studying her as if testing the edges of her composure. Then he chuckled, a low sound that carried oddly in the quiet. "Maybe. But I've got a dare for you." He unslung the rifle with a practiced motion and held it out. Not quite offering, not quite challenging, more like setting a trap. His eyes gleamed beneath the brim of his cap. 4,000 meters. "Think you can make that shot?" Or are you just here to count the scraps? The question hung between them, sharp as a blade, daring her to step across a line she hadn't even known existed. The rifle felt heavier than she imagined when he finally pressed it into her hands. It wasn't just the weight of steel and glass, it was the gravity of what it represented. She had carried rifles before, cleaned them, lugged them from one post to another, but never like this. This one wasn't just a weapon, it was a beast, long-barreled and finely tuned, balanced for a purpose that seemed almost unreal. The stock pressed against her shoulder with a quiet insistence, reminding her that she was holding power capable of stretching across horizons. She settled to the ground slowly, awkwardly at first, as if she didn't quite belong in the posture. The sniper crouched nearby, watching with that same half-smirk, his silence sharper than any words. She lowered herself behind the scope, and the world shifted. The vast desert that had seemed so endless suddenly collapsed into a small circle of clarity. Her eye caught the shimmer of air currents, the distant rise of hills, a sliver of metal barely visible against the horizon. 4,000 meters. She didn't need him to say it, she knew that was the mark. Her pulse quickened, each beat loud in her ears. She adjusted her grip, steadying the rifle as best she could. The kick of nerves made her hands shake, but she clenched her jaw and pressed harder into the dirt. The earth smelled of oil, dust, and faint smoke, grounding her even as her mind tried to convince her this was impossible. You see it. His voice broke through the silence at last, calm and measured. Yes, she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was answering him or herself. Her finger brushed the trigger lightly, almost reverently. The weight of it was startling. How little pressure it would take, how simple it was to release something that could travel so far and strike so hard. She tried to focus on the scope, on the line of sight, but her mind kept drifting to what this shot meant. It wasn't just about hitting steel in the distance. It was about proving something, maybe to him, maybe to herself. The rifle dug deeper into her shoulder as she exhaled slowly. She had never felt so small, and yet never so dangerous. Just her, the rifle, and the impossible stretch of distance between her and the target. She could hear her own heartbeat, steady but heavy, echoing in her ears like a drum. Each rise and fall of her chest shifted the crosshairs, and she realized how much control it would take. Not of the weapon, but of herself. She inhaled deeply, filling her lungs with hot desert air, then let it go in a slow stream, watching the reticle drift and settle again. She adjusted her elbows, digging them into the dirt to find balance, the coarse grit biting into her skin. The sniper crouched beside her, silent now, as if he knew that any word might fracture the fragile concentration building inside her. She could feel his gaze, though, sharp as the sun overhead, waiting to see if she would falter. Through the scope, the horizon wavered, heat rising in shimmering curtains that bent and blurred the image. The plate seemed to flicker, sometimes solid, sometimes dissolving into the mirage. She tried to steady her breathing, counting in her head. 1, 2, 3, holding, releasing, letting the rhythm anchor her. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, not yet pulling, only learning its curve, its resistance. She thought of the casings still scattered behind her, hundreds of tiny reminders that shots fired never return. Each one told a story, of intention, of consequence. This would be no different, only this time the shot would be hers. The wind shifted, a faint whisper tugging at the edges of her awareness. She adjusted instinctively, though she had never been trained for this kind of calculation. Something in her gut, something primal, told her how to compensate. She felt the weight of the rifle settle into her body, the barrel becoming an extension of her line of sight. Another breath. Another pause. The world outside the scope fell away, the ruins, the silence, even the sniper at her side. All that remained was the faint shimmer of steel on the horizon. She tightened her grip just enough, her heartbeat slowing as if her body finally understood the demand she placed on it. The silence was no longer empty. It was waiting. She let the last bit of air leave her lungs, her body going still in a way she had never experienced before. For a heartbeat she felt suspended, as if time itself had paused to watch what she would do. Then her finger closed the distance, a slow squeeze rather than a pull, and the trigger broke clean beneath her touch. The rifle roared, the recoil jolting into her shoulder. Not violent but heavy, like the push of a giant hand. Dust kicked up around the muzzle, swirling in the hot air. For a moment, there was only the echo of the shot rolling across the desert, a thunderclap racing into silence. She held her breath again, instinctively, waiting. 4,000 meters was an eternity. The bullet had already left her, carrying her choice farther than she could see. But still she waited as if her will alone could guide it. The horizon shimmered, the target nearly lost in the haze. Then, faint but unmistakable, came the sound, metal ringing sharp and clear, a single note that cut through the stillness like a bell. She blinked, almost not believing it. The crosshairs wavered as she lifted her head from the scope, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. She turned slightly, catching the sniper's expression. He wasn't smiling this time. His smirk had vanished, replaced by something quieter, more thoughtful, as if he hadn't expected her to succeed. "Not bad," he muttered, his voice low, almost grudging. She didn't answer. The rifle still rested heavy in her hands, but it no longer felt like it belonged to her. Slowly, deliberately, she set it down on the dirt, the barrel angled away. The weapon looked different now, like something alive she had only borrowed for a moment. The silence returned, thicker than before. She stood, brushed grit from her palms, and adjusted the strap of the bag hanging at her side. The casings inside clinked softly, a familiar sound, grounding her once more. Without another word, she turned and knelt again, resuming her task, plucking brass from the dirt with the same steady rhythm as before. The shot was already behind her, just another casing waiting to fall.